Hi everyone. Yeah, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending where you're joining from. I'm very happy to welcome you guys for this first session of the SNARGs Book Study Group. And I'm even more happy to welcome with us Alessandro Chiesa, one of the co-author of the book, which your name is Building Cryptographic Proofs from Hash Functions. So yeah, he's gonna walk us through the context of the book, etc. But maybe I will leave the mic to Alessandro, who will explain even better than me what he's going to talk about for the hour to come. If you have questions or anything, feel free to drop them in chat, and yeah, we will go through it as the lecture goes. Up to you, Alessandro.
Thank you. Thank you very much also for putting together this event. So hi, everyone. Um, so the goal for today is to provide a very high-level overview of the contents of this book that I spent in the last 3 years writing with my wonderful co-author, Elon Yogev. And then in subsequent weeks, some kind volunteers from my research group will be going over kind of in more detail pieces of the book. And towards the end of the day, I'll give you like a sense of what units they'll go through. Okay. So in terms of questions, as Gaylord said, please feel free to kind of jump in either in chat or just unmute yourself. I think if it doesn't get too hectic, I think we can also just do that. So I want to start first, maybe a few minutes about the motivation of this book. Okay, so I've been working in the area of cryptographic proofs for quite a while, since 2008, 2009. And kind of over this past 15 years, the landscape of constructions of cryptographic proofs has significantly grown, right? There is like different types of probabilistic proofs, different type of cryptography that come together to create various notions of zero knowledge and succinctness. Now, of course, this landscape evolves as time passes, and whenever you're faced with the question of should I write a survey, should I write a book? It's a bit of a trade-off, right? Because you don't know by the time you're done with this major effort of a survey or a book, how well it will age in the subsequent, 5, 10 years. Maybe all the effort you put in to systematize state of the art at time X, at time X plus 5 years, it's mostly kind of out of date, right? Nevertheless, there is a particularly there's a unique kind of section of the SNARGscape that, in my opinion, is a great starting point for systematization, and that has to do with cryptographic proofs that are built from essentially no structure, what we can call cryptographic hash functions. So think something like SHA-256 or Ketchak. These are kind of cryptographic primitives whose entire design is to have no structure. You want to hash some input and have the output look like as random as possible compared to any other type of any other input, right? Now, of course, this is not literally possible because that would be like a truly random function. But the idea of hash functions like SHA-256 is to approximate the behavior of so-called random oracle. This is what computer scientists call random functions. So there's a few interesting things that happen around random functions, okay? The first one is that, in my opinion, they are mathematically very easy to describe and understand. So anytime you do cryptography, never mind SNARKs, but like in general cryptography, and all you're really playing with are hash functions, that's like a nice, comfortable place to be. You just need to reason about like discrete probability, some simple probability statements. You don't need to know any algebra. You don't need to know any kind of lattices, any complexity theory. So things you can do with random functions are a good entry point to parts of cryptography. In particular, in my opinion, to understand kind of where the SNARKs come from, focusing on SNARK constructions that are based just on hash functions is a great entry point because you can appreciate definitions and constructions and security proofs without that much background. Okay, so first point I want to get across is that SNARKs based on hash functions have great pedagogical value. Now, it could be that we would have lived in a world where SNARKs based on hash functions have only pedagogical value. We're fortunate to live in a world where they don't have only pedagogical value, but we have SNARK constructions based on hash functions alone that are in fact very practical. Okay, they're deployed today in a number of systems. Okay, so it's not just a section or land of the SNARKscape that is a good entry point, but it's also a section of the SNARKscape that gives you a window into paradigms, ideas, kind of recipes that are precisely the ones that would be used in practice for a certain class of SNARKs. Okay, so that's great. That's wonderful. Okay, so that's the second point, that a kind of SNARKs based on hash functions are include some practical constructions. But it goes also beyond that. SNARKs based on hash functions are not just a class of SNARKs among others. They are in some ways unique among other classes of SNARKs in that they enjoy some rather unique properties that directly come from the fact that they don't rely on the hardness of discrete logarithms, the hardness of factoring integers, the hardness of finding short vectors in a lattice. The fact that you have these, the only hardness that you have in your SNARK is this random function means that constructions of SNARKs based on hash functions are very easy to deploy. All you really need to do is agree on the hash function. This is something that sometimes is called SNARKs without trusted setup. That's not entirely correct because there's always a setup. In this case, is the choice of hash function. But the point is that the setup is public coin, okay? There's no so-called toxic waste. There's no private coins in the generation of the public parameters. We just need to agree that our system is going to use, for example, SHA-256, okay? Formally, this is described as saying you construct SNARKs in the random oracle model, where the only setup is the random oracle. In practice, we instantiate it with a cryptographic hash function. So this is fantastic, and I can tell you that kind of about 10, 13 years ago, when together with other co-authors, we were working on first deployments of SNARKs in the real world. At the time, with the kind of private coin trusted setups, it was a major pain in the neck to deploy SNARKs that don't have this wonderful property of a transparent setup. Okay, but anyways, back to SNARKs based on hash functions. An additional advantage is that there is no private coin setup. You can just like decide our system is going to use the SHA-256. That's it. That is your setup. Very easy to deploy. Okay. Also, because there is no structure in these random functions, one can actually prove security against quantum algorithms, which makes these paradigms and recipes that are described in this book particularly future-proof. In particular, we know that these things are secure in the so-called quantum random oracle model, so they are likely to outlive many other paradigms, specifically, for instance, things based on the hardness of discrete logarithms, even when a kind of large-scale fault-tolerant quantum computers are built. Anyways, these are 3 points that I made about why this class of SNARGs stands out in some ways against many other classes of SNARGs. And because of these reasons, with my esteemed co-author, Ilon Yogev, we decided to take this as a first kind of in-depth attempt at systematization. And so we wrote this book. Okay, so I'm gonna maybe now transition from the motivation of why are we focusing on SNARKs based on hash functions into what did we decide to include in this book. Okay, but before I transition to the content, I want to see if there's any questions about the motivation that I just discussed. Specifically, are there any questions about why the class of SNARKs based on hash functions is notable and worthy of study? If there are no questions, I'll just continue to the contents of the book. All right, seems like there are no questions. Obviously, please do ask questions if you want, okay? All right, so let's maybe discuss with the help of some diagram. This one. All right. So taking a step back, essentially the vast majority of SNARKs, based on hash functions or not, are a clever combination of two ingredients. One ingredient is some sort of cryptographic commitment coming from cryptography. And the second ingredient is some sort of complexity theoretic information theoretically secure object coming from complexity theory, a probabilistic proof. This is kind of like a general pattern that we see across, with very few exceptions, all SNARK constructions. This remains true in the particular case of SNARKs based on hash functions. Specifically, SNARKs based on hash functions are a combination of certain types of commitment schemes in the random oracle model, namely commitment schemes based on hash functions, and probabilistic proofs. So things like interactive proofs, probabilistically checkable proofs, interactive oracle proofs, and so on and so forth. All right, so it means that if you want to construct a hash-based SNARK, you need to have the commitment on one side and the probabilistic proof on the other, and you combine them in some magical way to get a hash-based SNARK. Now, covering both ingredients and how you combine them, that would be too much, okay? So in this book, we drew a very strict line, and we said, from the perspective of this book, we are going to take the complexity theoretic object, probabilistic proof, as given to us. You give me an IP, interactive proof. You give me a PCP, probabilistic checkable proof. You give me an IOP, interactive oracle proof. And my goal as a book, or as the content that we put in this artifact, is to explain how you take that probabilistic proof and you construct a SNARK. Okay. So we did this separation of excluding probabilistic proofs entirely from this book for multiple reasons. The first one is just one out of size. We cannot boil the ocean and write, like a 1,500-page book. That's just, we'll never finish. We have to take reasonably sized bite-sized chunks, right? So we said, let's just focus on the compilation step from probabilistic proof to SNARK. But there's also an advantage to that, okay? There are two more advantages. One advantage is that by focusing on the compilation step, how do you compile a probabilistic proof into a SNARK? We can just ignore all the messy math of algebra, polynomials, probabilistic proofs. Where do they come from? It's a deep rabbit hole, best left for a separate adventure. But that adventure, in some ways, is still, and so that's my first point, like it's best left for a separate adventure, so we don't have to worry about a lot of background material. We can just focus on a minimal background material. What is a random function? How to construct commitment schemes? And off of those, how do you construct a SNARK given a probabilistic proof? Much smaller background required. But there's also a second point having to do with the specific point in time that we are at right now. I've been working, in fact, I kind of co-introduced the notion of an IOP, some years ago, and I've been working in the area of probabilistic proofs for now 15 years. It is my opinion as an expert is that the landscape of probabilistic proofs is not quite ripe for systematization, or at least from the type of systematization that is worthy of a book. It will need a few more years to understand a bit better which paradigms and ideas really should make it into a book. If Elon and I had been writing a book on probabilistic proofs 3 years ago, it would not mostly be outdated in the next few years, but we would have to continually update it significantly because research is still ongoing quite a lot on that front. On the other hand, given a probabilistic proof, what do you do with it in the random oracle model? That's something we understand in a much more stable way. The paradigms and ideas have mostly converged, and while there are potential opportunities for additional optimizations, the kind of derivative of change in that part is much slower than derivative change in the part of probabilistic proofs. Therefore, we felt a lot more comfortable spending time to systematize and nail down in extreme detail kind of what happens in the compilation part in the random walk model. Okay, so if you're looking to learn about where do probabilistic proofs come from, this book will not tell you that. Okay, you have to look somewhere else. Where, for example, you can look at Justin Tyler's book, for which there is already a study club. Or I have a summer school and a course that I've been teaching on probabilistic proofs for a number of years. And there's a lot of material there, but it's not part of this book. Okay? This book, we focused specifically, given a probabilistic proof, how do you compile it into SNARG? Okay? So it's all about the commitment schemes and compilation processes. So things like keywords that I'll just throw out now, things like the Fiat-Shamir transformation, the Merkle trees, the Mikali construction, the BCS construction, all of these things are here. I'll go over them in a more structured way to describe kind of what are they trying to do. But it's about the compilation part. Given a probabilistic proof, how do you construct a SNARG? Okay, we are excluding anything about where do probabilistic proofs come from. It doesn't matter. That state of the art will keep improving. This book will just kind of benefit from those improved constructions without having to change. Okay. All right. So that is about the scope of the book. All right. In terms of audience, okay, we're trying to, in some sense, please two different types of audiences or multiple types of audiences. So there is a risk of making no one happy, but I think we try to do a decent job in both directions. So on the one hand, there are students and researchers who may want to enter as a research kind of researchers this kind of area, and they want to have some reference that we'll kind of discuss in detail and not just at the intuitive level, a number of security reductions. Okay, so this is one audience that we had in mind. Another audience that we had in mind is kind of practitioners in industry that are trying to, given a probabilistic proof, construct a SNARK. So you need to know how this is done, and you need to be able to reliably set security parameters. Okay, so for these people, we try to make protocols particularly explicit, and we have discussions about how do you go about setting security parameters, and what does it even mean to achieve a certain security level. Okay, now different parts of this book may kind of attract these different two audiences. So it may not be that every part of the book is of interest to you. That's fine. But we had these two in mind, and so we kind of have and as I go through the contents of the book, I'll just point out what could be of interest to whom. Okay. All right. So I'm about to transition into the this book is divided in parts. I want to go through the high level kind of goal of each part. But before I do that, I'm going to see if there are questions regarding the split of material, kind of what is inside the book and what is outside the book. Like, are there any questions about that part?
So we had one question from Sergey Skarnov. He's basically asking if the probabilistic nature explain why the K in SNARK was dropped, the knowledge was dropped, and you talk about SNARG rather than SNARK.
No, it's this is completely unrelated. In speech, I may say G or K with no particular reason, just because the speech is online rather than offline, and I'll sometimes make kind of I won't pay attention to the G versus K. In written text, generally you write K if you specifically are caring about the knowledge part, and you write G if you just mean the general idea of succinctness, but without specifically highlighting either knowledge or zero knowledge. There's no point basically to emphasize knowledge if you're not specifically emphasizing it. So basically many techniques equally apply to SNARGs without caring about knowledge. And so there's no point to emphasize it. Yeah. But unrelated to probabilistic proofs, okay? More questions?
I just want to make sure I'm following with like maybe an analogy. If and you say cookbook, so let's say this was for homemade soup. It's basically telling you the base ingredients to keep it concise while leaving the knowledge a general unknown factor that can kind of you could vary your spices, but in the end you still have a chicken noodle soup. Is this correct?
Yeah,
Somewhat?
basically, I'm opening up, so a certain one layer of abstraction, like, in terms of certain ingredients, but some of these ingredients are themselves non-trivial, and I'm not opening those up. Otherwise, the book would explode in size, and also, would maybe stand the test of time less. Okay, so this book is basically telling you how to construct the final product in terms of certain ingredients, but some of these ingredients themselves, will come from other ingredients, and but those will take you far afield somewhere else, and not the scope of this book. Okay, so let me maybe
Thank
even
you.
be more specific, and I'm gonna maybe discuss this picture here, which is basically like a diagram of kind of what happens in terms of compilation. Okay. So when you want to construct a succinct argument, okay, where succinct means that communication and potentially verification are much smaller than the computation that you're checking, you may be constructing an interactive argument, we denote it an IARG, or a non-interactive argument, an ARG. Okay? Why would you ever consider an interactive argument? Well, sometimes that's what you want, but even if you don't want it, it is a very useful, very, very useful pedagogical stepping stone. So we consider it anyways, okay? So let's kind of look inside here, and we have goals, okay? We have starting points, and we have transformations. What are the starting points? Well, you see here a Venn diagram. This Venn diagram includes in it different types of probabilistic proofs, and they are nested in terms of which thing generalizes what. So you may have heard of an IOP, interactive oracle proof. This is the most general type of probabilistic proof that we consider in this book. And that is indeed the one that includes many practical constructions deployed today. Okay. So you will see, like, I don't think today I will have time to explain, what it is. That's, I guess, the goal of other episodes of this series. But for now, it suffices to say that this thing being the most general one includes as special cases other things. Okay, so for example, as a special case, you have a PCP, something known as a probabilistically checkable proof. It's like a non-interactive IOP. It's like a one-message IOP. It's a special case. Why is it worth considering? Well, even though we don't have practical constructions, understanding how to construct a SNARG out of a PCP is easier than to construct a SNARG from an IOP. So it's easier to understand that first before you understand the more general idea. Ditto for something called an interactive proof. There's something called a Sigma protocol. There is a special case of an interactive proof. And so we consider that separately to basically understand certain ideas first, and then we extend them to the multi-round case. So what's happening here is that there are two incomparable paradigms. There is things that are dedicated to removing interaction. So here you have a Sigma protocol. It's a 3-message protocol. You have a public coin IP. That's a many-round interactive protocol. And the Fiat-Shamir transformation is a technique to remove interaction. You have something interactive, you make it non-interactive. Something many-round interactive, you still make it non-interactive. So 2 parts of this book are dedicated to purely describing how you remove interaction from interactive protocols, starting first from the 3-message case and then to the many-round case. So that is the case of a Sigma protocol and an interactive proof. Again, where do Sigma protocols come from? Where do interactive proofs come from? Not the purpose of this book. We are telling you, if you have one that is of interest, then we explain you how you transform it into a non-interactive argument. Okay? So, and that's just about the Fiat-Shamir transformation. Now, there are other transformations about PCPs and IOPs. So a PCP is incomparable to an IP, but an IOP simultaneously generalizes an IP and a PCP. Again, Right now, I'm just telling you this as a fact. I'm not explaining why. Okay, so just now take the Venn diagram as a given. When you have a PCP, it is something that is already non-interactive. So your goal is not to necessarily, I don't know, remove interaction. What you want to do is you have this kind of proof length and query complexity. Query complexity is much smaller than the proof length, and you want to transform the PCP into an object where the size of the snark is proportional to the query complexity, not the proof length of the PCP. So there's a way to do it interactively using an interactive argument. That's the Killian protocol. And then you can combine the Killian protocol and the Fiat-Shamir transformation in something called the Micali transformation that gives you something non-interactive that is both succinct and non-interactive. Underlying the Killian protocol, there is a commitment scheme, a Merkle tree, that I will talk about separately in a moment. Okay? So Micali, to understand Micali, one has to first understand Killian and also separately understand the Fiat-Shamir transformation. And then there is something that extends this paradigm to multi-round PCPs, also known as IOPs, first as a warm-up, constructing an interactive argument from a multi-round PCP or IOP, and then removing interaction. The BCS transformation is what underlies essentially all constructions in practice based on IOPs. Okay? So what this diagram is saying is that starting points in these Venn diagrams we take as a given. And what we explain is what are these gray things? What is an interactive argument? What is an interactive argument? And how do you go from here to there? Okay, so basically, this is a map of the things that one can learn in this book. All right? Now, this one is kind of like a in hindsight map. It doesn't show conceptual dependencies. That one has more to do with this part. I'm going to describe this one in a moment. Let me first see what questions. There's a question about part 4. I'll describe commitment schemes in a moment. But I want to first see if there are questions about this, this map over here. So again, to get situated, essentially all hash-based constructions in the real world are things here, okay? You start from some IOP, you apply the BCS transformation. That's your thing. To understand this one, well, you need to build up to it. First understand this, then understand that, then understand this, that, this, and eventually this one will get you there, okay? This one kind of encapsulates ideas from all the prior things. And that is the thing that people use in practice. Everything else is kind of not really, it's more like kind of conceptual stepping stones. Okay. Okay, I don't believe there are no questions, so please don't be shy. If there are questions about this picture, before I kind of okay, so there's a question about okay, so the question is, do you need to understand where the probabilistic proofs come from in order to understand this book? No. That is precisely why we've wrote this book, that you don't need to know where, like how to construct these things. We give you the definitions. We tell you what each of these things are in extreme detail, okay? We're just not telling you how you build them, right? If you tell me, oh, I want to construct an IOP for, I don't know, verifying 1,000 signature verifications, okay, well, that's not part of this book. But what I'm telling you is that after you construct it, this is the definition of an IOP, and that's enough to understand this book, because this book doesn't care where does the IOP come from. But understanding the definition of IOP, that's simple, that's easy. It's just some interface. It basically is some proof model in some idealized world. And I'm telling you, it works like this, it works like that. And this book will tell you, given this definition that we give you, how you transform it into a SNARG, okay? And it's kind of like I find it like a good place to start, including for novices, because it's kind of like the first layer. You can imagine a SNARG, it's kind of like an onion with many layers. And as you go deeper and deeper, you go into essentially hairier and hairier math, okay? It gets, on the outermost layer, you have random oracles. Then you have constructions probabilistic proofs that involve in polynomials and arithmetization. And inside of it, you have usually low-degree tests that involve analyses of error-correcting codes and property testing. And it just gets harder and harder as you go deeper into the onion. This book is kind of the outermost layer. And I'm just saying, this is a SNARG. And you peel off the first layer to reveal what's underneath. What's underneath is a probabilistic proof, and I'm explaining you how to bridge that last step, okay? But you don't have to be bothered, kind of what's inside the probabilistic proof. Now, the interfaces are very clean, so one can actually simultaneously try to learn about how to construct a SNARG given a probabilistic proof, and also you can simultaneously learn about how do you construct probabilistic proofs. Because there is a clear interface in between that separates the two worlds, at this point they're kind of decoupled, right? Yeah, this book should basically, with enough, let's say, dedication and goodwill, anybody with, let's say, basic, with like, let's say, undergrad algorithms, undergrad discrete probability, should basically be able to read the entire book. You don't need any algebra. There are no fancy probability analyses. I don't think we even use a Chernow bound. We're using, like, at most, union bound, inclusion, exclusion. Maybe, I'm not sure even Chebyshev, like very basic probability analyses. And it's all about basically constructing cute objects in this world where all you have is hash functions and analyzing them. There is no fancy math. There's no fancy algebra. It's just definitions, okay? And some simple discrete probability. More questions about this picture? I'm about to transition into this other picture here. So please stop me if it's a good time to ask questions. Okay. So I want to discuss this picture. So this picture is basically another view of the same material, okay? Except that now it provides a dependency graph for the things that you need to understand before understanding other things. So we divided the book into two layers. We have parts, and each part contains a group of chapters. And of course, you have sections and subsections. But the main kind of backbone are these parts. The first part is purely definitional. It's basically saying, look, we want to construct SNARGs. What are these things? How do we define them? What is completeness? What is soundness? What is knowledge soundness? What is zero knowledge? And we start playing a little bit with this notion. We make some remarks, we make some simple exercises, some simple lower bounds, just basically manipulating and getting familiar with the notion of a SNARG in the random oracle model. So you have to set up what is a random function, notation. Basically, it's just so we have notational and conceptual infrastructure to talk about the final goal. Interactive arguments and non-interactive arguments. All right? So this is basically creating a common language. Obviously, this one comes before anything else. So that's part one. Then we have part two and part three. Okay, so part two obviously depends on part one because we need to have some common language. And part three depends on part two in the following sense. In the Venn diagram, I said that the Fiat-Shamir transformation is something that lets you remove interaction from either a three-message protocol, Sigma protocol, or a many-message protocol, a public key interactive proof, something that extends a Sigma protocol to many rounds. So part two and part three are precisely that. They're telling you, here is how you construct non-interactive arguments from Sigma protocols via the Fiat-Shamir transformation. And here is how to extend those ideas to many rounds. The end. That's what these two chapters do. Now, the Fiat-Shamir transformation has been in cryptography for quite a while, but it is often misunderstood, and I would say often underestimated in terms of its complexity, in terms of kind of how does it affect the security of a protocol. And so we go in extreme detail describing and proving properties of the case from three-message Sigma protocols to the case of any number of messages. But the whole point here is just remove interaction. And of course, as you know, the rough idea is that you use the hash function to simulate the public coins of the verifier, which is no longer there to interact with the prover. So that's part 2 and part 3. All right. So interactive proofs generally play the role of a subroutine to other probabilistic proofs, but there aren't really useful SNARGs purely based on IPs or SPs. This is just kind of pedagogical warm-up. Next, we want to also talk about how do you construct SNARGs, because in Sigma protocols and interactive proofs won't suffice. They're just enough to illustrate the ideas of FHME. SNARGs ultimately are built from things that are PCPs and IOPs that are essentially big proof strings in which you query a small number of locations, okay? And as you will learn about in more detail in later editions, these SNARGs rely ultimately on commitment schemes, specifically the Merkle tree, okay? So we dedicate an entire part just to study commitment schemes in a random oracle model. We first study like a basic commitment scheme, just hash your message with some salt. And then out of that understanding, we build the entire Merkle tree. Again, this is something that usually it is underestimated in complexity, but there's a lot of fine details in setting correctly security parameters and correctly constructing Merkle trees that we go over in detail in this part. So this entire part is just about understanding and learning about commitment schemes in a random oracle model. Based on the idea of the Fiat-Shamir transformation and commitment schemes, this directly leads to the so-called Killian and Micali constructions, which are basically saying, give me a PCP, I'll give you back a SNARG. All right? This is a beautiful combination of Merkle trees and the Fiat-Shamir transformation, and it is explained here, okay? This is the simplest construction of a SNARG known to man, all right? It has amazing pedagogical value. Where do SNARGs come from? Is just Merkle trees plus Fiat-Shamir. And it's explained inside here. Again, we go over it in extreme detail, proving in full proofs, completeness, soundness, knowledge soundness, zero knowledge, and you can see exactly kind of what security you get when you combine these ingredients. And then one can learn from the multi-round Fiat-Shamir transformation and the Killian-Micali constructions to construct SNARGs based on IOPs. This is indeed the constructions that people have in practice. And this is where it's kind of the culmination of the entire book, where all the ideas come in one place to say, give me an IOP, I will give you back a SNARG. And by the way, since IOPs are very practical, the SNARG will be practical as well. So this is a dependency graph, and it's divided in parts, and it can pretty clear how you can navigate if you don't want to, if you want to avoid certain chapters. All right. All right. So we also have some additional part that we call practical considerations. In here, we put a medley of, I'm going to kind of go and see it. A medley of topics that don't neatly fall into the other parts. We give a short survey with references of actual constructions of probabilistic proofs so that you can, if you're curious to follow up on where these probabilistic proofs come from, you can start from here. We have a chapter that explains with examples, including numerical examples, how do you set parameters to achieve security levels, okay? Because we give theorems, right? So let me give an example. Let's say we are looking at the Micali transformation, and we look at some theorem about soundness. And it tells you, look, the soundness error of the construction is blah, 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 right? Okay, right now it's just some notation that doesn't necessarily make sense. All right, fine. As a practitioner, you kind of take stock of this expression. You say, okay, how many security bits do I need my PCP to have? How can I parameterize the Merkle tree to achieve certain errors? What does it even mean? So we have an extensive chapter where we define the notion of security level. Note that in the cryptographic literature, this is usually discussed extremely informally. So I think we also have some contributions here that are kind of systematizing the landscape and providing like a formal recipe that enables you to set security parameters reliably. So that's this chapter. We also have a chapter that discusses and analyzes common optimizations of the Merkle tree used in practice. We have two big chapters that basically tell you how certain properties of probabilistic proofs imply security of these constructions. Let me take a step back in a moment. When you construct SNARGs, you start from probabilistic proofs that are not just secure, but they are secure plus plus. Secure plus plus, I'm just using it as an informal term, but all I want to say is that because underneath you're using the Fiat-Shamir transformation, it's not enough for the underlying probabilistic proofs to just be sound. To withstand the Fiat-Shamir transformation, they need to be extra sound. And so the right notion for extra soundness to study is state restoration soundness. That notion is very convenient from an analysis standpoint, but when you construct a probabilistic proof, it's not very convenient to show it directly. So instead, in practice, what people do is they show stronger properties that imply it. Specifically, people typically prove that a concrete probabilistic proof either satisfies special soundness or round-bound soundness. And these things imply the things that suffice for security in these constructions. So in these chapters, we explain what these notions are and how they are tied to the notion of state restoration soundness. In the final chapter here, we describe an important setting in practice, which is the pre-processing setting. And I'll just briefly mention that sometimes in practice, you have pieces of your problem. Maybe you're dealing with a circuit or maybe machine computation and a circuit that you don't want the verifier to pay for in the online phase. So you want to kind of pre-process it away once and for all. And this can be done, and it's used in practice a lot, particularly with things like, I don't know, built-ins or like kind of little unstructured circuits that kind of you cannot really compress or view as it's not convenient to view them as a program on a machine. And this kind of brings, you need to start talking about holographic proofs, which is the right notion of kind of offline-online model for probabilistic proofs. And we explain kind of how all of this comes together to construct pre-processing arguments. Okay, so I have a question. They must have a state root or DAC connection outside. No, state restoration soundness, I presume this question is about state restoration soundness. It mostly means that security holds even when you attack the verifier across multiple executions, okay, including related executions. And intuitively, that's naturally what happens when you apply the Fiat-Shamir transformation, because a malicious prover, can just imagine these related executions in its head and post-select the one that it likes the most when it outputs a transcript. So that's why people study state restoration soundness. All right, so this was an overview of the content of the book. I'm about to make some remarks of how to efficiently navigate the book, and then I will transition into an example of what you might expect in the next few episodes. But before I do that, I'm just going to go back to the picture I had. This one, all right? Also I'll just highlight that sort of this book kind of prefers depth over breadth. And that's why we focused specifically on hash-based SNARGs. But focusing on hash-based SNARGs, gives us the room and the space to really dig into basically full proofs of security that are kind of gifted to posterity. So they can be audited and kind of followed as an analogy for potentially other security proofs that people might come up with. They're very useful as models. Okay, let me just pause, and I want to see if there are any questions regarding kind of the different parts of the book, kind of what are their purposes, and yeah. Again, please do ask questions.
I have one, but I don't want you to give any kind of just a concise yes or no answer, because I don't want to transition. It's a little more specific to me, but I'm using a bag of cells, and as part of this deserialized Just do you have any concerns when I mentioned that in hashing 0 related to what we're talking about now, but adding that aspect in for mostly transportation outside of the SNARK? Yes or no? Any concerns?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Maybe we
Okay,
can
don't worry.
I
Yeah,
can stick around after
thank you. Yes, yeah,
I'm happy
thank
to
you.
like
Perfect.
unpack the question. Okay, there's another question regarding the random oracle model versus quantum random oracle model. So we do not discuss the quantum random oracle model in this book. Let me highlight the differences between the two and mention kind of what is known, all right? So the random oracle model is an idealization of hash-based constructions. Basically, it says, imagine a world where SHA-256 is actually not SHA-256, but rather like a truly random function. In this world, you can perform kind of very good analyses, and then you just make the heuristic assumption that the real world behaves like that ideal world. Okay, good. Now, a quantum algorithm in a world where it has oracle access to this random function should be able to make superposition queries to the random function. Why? Because in the real world, it can evaluate the circuit of SHA-256 in superposition and then measure, right? So formally, you need to be able to prove that your construction is secure against superposition queries to the random oracle. This is known as the quantum random oracle model. Okay, fine. Fact, not every construction that is secure in a random oracle model is also secure in a quantum random oracle model. They are separated. So you cannot automatically say, oh, yeah, well, everything is proved secure in the random oracle model. We can assume post-quantum security because the random function doesn't have discrete logs of factoring in it, and we don't see an algorithm for it. No, no, no. There are things that are secure in the random oracle model and not in the quantum random oracle model. Okay. So if these constructions are secure in the quantum random oracle model, it is because these constructions are secure, not because of some general paradigm. Fine. Now, it turns out these constructions have been proven secure in a quantum random oracle model. This is some work with some of my students kind of 5-6 years ago. And you can prove kind of concrete bounds that are good. And you have some slightly different expressions if you want post-quantum security compared to classical security. Now, when it comes to this book specifically, we only have a brief remark with pointers. We have on our future to-do stack to expand maybe a chapter that explains at high level the quantum oracle model, but we are definitely not going to provide the actual security analysis in the quantum oracle model because that would open like an entire Pandora box of like, far more background, far more notation, and probably add another 100 pages to the book. So that we're not going to do, right? But everything that is done here is known to be post-quantum secure, and to the best of my understanding, are all ideas and paradigms that are going to be with us for a very, very long time, probably beyond our lifespans. There are questions about kind of trapdoors and lattices. So lattice-based SNARGs are kind of not part of this book because they may or may not use also random oracles, but they are also using lattices, right? And in this book is about what you can do with random oracles and only random oracles. And we're kind of explicitly excluding anything that touches discrete logarithms, lattices, factoring. All of that is kind of not allowed, all right? Part of the reason is that we don't know those specific types of cryptography, how they're going to fare in the future. We do know that certain things are not secure against quantum algorithms, but even the lattices, the specific paradigms and ideas are very much in flux. And so, they just kind of don't belong to this type of systematization. My own personal opinion is that kind of it is safest for the long distant future. Like, if I had to bet on some paradigm that remains secure, half a millennium from now, it is things that are purely based on hash functions. Why? Because we'll always have some hash functions. They are basically things that are completely unstructured, and we're not borrowing any structure from nature. We're just borrowing some kind of complicated looking thing that is hard to analyze. hard to attack, basically. So I place the most faith in SNARGs that use and only use hash functions and nothing else, including lattices. Okay, there's a question about resources that is useful to see at the same time. Well, there was an online course held, I think, last spring, meaning spring 2023. It's at, I think, zklearning.org, which covers some of the more practical aspects of SNARGs, actual constructions of IOPs, domain-specific languages to map high-level programming languages to low-level constraints, and many other similar things that are of practical interest. So that could be a good a kind of companion. And I think we mentioned some of these resources somewhere here. Let's see. We mentioned it somewhere. I remember I wrote it. There we go. We have a parhead on complementary resources that points you to things that you may find useful to study kind of in parallel, but they're not required to understand this book. This book is essentially self-contained. If you have undergrad algorithms and undergrad discrete probability, you should be able to just read this book, okay? All right. So before I move on from this picture, let me see if there are more questions on kind of contents of the book.
Actually, I have one on my side. You mentioned
Yes.
that maybe if we wanted so, one could actually skip some parts. For instance, if you want to learn specifically about Mikali or Killian, for instance, you would jump maybe directly to part 5 or something like that. But would you agree, is it fair to say that one must go through the part 1 to understand exactly the definitions and also the notation that are used in the book?
Yeah, part 1 is basically necessary for anything else. I don't mean that everything in part 1 is, because, let's maybe go to part 1. Sorry. Some things are not necessary. For example, this chapter 6 is basically all like simple observations and warm-ups about the definitions. But if you feel comfortable with the definitions, you can just skip it, right? This one are just some technicalities about sometimes we use one random oracle or multiple random oracles. We prove, how they're equivalent. I think I would say that, kind of chapters 2, 3, 4 are kind of the bread and butter of things that are most often used. But you can also try your chances and say, look, you're somewhat familiar with the high-level ideas, and what you can do is, if you want to learn the Mikali construction, is to say, you know what, I'm just going to jump to part 5, start reading, and then you start clicking back pointers to definitions whenever you kind of get stuck, right? And you kind of fill in from there. That is also fun, right? If you are, like extremely new to much of the material, then it might be less frustrating to kind of touch, or rather read linearly read 2, 3, 4, potentially 5, but at least 2, 3, 4 first, and then jump from there. Okay. So back to the yeah, I also want to make another point about how to use this book. Okay. So the security proofs, we've made the constructions, we know them for many years, okay? Like it would have taken like a tenth of the time to write this book if we mostly write the constructions and the definitions. What has taken us a lot of time is to write security proofs that are complete in our eyes, and they are also correct in our eyes. So, but if you want to learn the material, it doesn't mean that you have to read every security proof in detail. They are just kind of, many of these protocols, you have pretty strong high-level intuition of what's going on, right? So let's say that I want to study something about Mikali. I can jump here, right? You can sort of learn, okay, what's the definition of a PCP? We can sort of learn about the warm-up, which is the Killian construction. But then you don't really need to read all of chapter 20, right? Because chapter 20.1 will give you the intuition and formal description of the construction. And then maybe you can learn about some basic property like non-adaptive soundness. But maybe that's enough for you, right? Maybe you don't really need to learn about how to prove adaptive soundness, or indeed how to prove knowledge soundness or zero knowledge. That's maybe on an as-needed basis. And as needed, why? Because maybe you need to, at some point, go in here and say, okay, maybe it's not a good example. Go in here for adaptive soundness and check, okay, what's the bound? And you can go and see the bound, but you don't have to read the entire proof, right? The proof here is needed if you want to look at it. What are the value of these proofs? These proofs, we've made an enormous effort to make them all visually and notationally highly related to one another so that any recurring patterns and recurring ideas are visually and notationally clear across the entire book. They're also explicit so that they can be over time audited by the community. And in some future, potentially even they have some kind of machine formally verified analogs of them. But they're here as a log of what is our understanding of this security, of these constructions for kind of posterity, right? Typos may show up and small fixes, but they're here as a reference for when you need them. So don't feel compelled, and neither should you read like things linearly about security reductions. Read them as needed. What is more important are the constructions and the theorem statements so you can understand what is the security that you get. All right, so I'm about to spend maybe 5 minutes talking about what might happen in the next few episodes. But let me go back to the picture and see if there are questions. Okay, there are questions. Are there exercises? But at this time, we don't have a plan for exercises. Part of it is that we actually started with exercises, and over time, we transformed the exercises and a bunch of remarks. Because, yeah, we were thinking, all right, we have state about the exercise, might as well just turn it into a fully worked out remark. And so we have just a bunch of kind of technical observations, additional lemmas, I don't know, auxiliary facts that we just end up stating and proving directly. And why? Because we had loaded state all to the point of remembering everything. And so we just noted it down for posterity. So we don't have exercises right now. Okay, so there's a question about on pads, no pad rules of thumb. Are these about Fiat Shamir, just to understand, or?
Oh, I just wondered if I was to recommend this to someone, would I just in general, any useful, because I know there is things to be aware of. Would it be helpful? Do you touch on this or no? I guess simple.
Things that I'd be aware of, you mean as background?
Yes, yeah, exactly. A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, so what we include is part 1 in the book is just some basic mathematical background that is just here as a reference. So you can kind of skim it. This is kind of even more basic than kind of definitions of SNARGs and company. And it's kind of reviewing things you're likely to have seen somewhere in undergrad, in just courses somewhere. And otherwise, beyond that, kind of all the relevant background is in, part 1, specifically, most notably, parts 1, 2, and 3. So sorry, chapters 2, 3, and 4. Okay.
Thank you. That's excellent. Really good. Yeah.
Question says, are there SNARK constructions which do not depend upon PCP or IOP? Yes, there are, but they are not based on hash functions alone. So this book contains the state of the art for SNARK constructions that use and only use hash functions. Anything that is outside of this paradigm is using something else. Is using lattices, is using Pedersen commitments, is using whatever, right? Other things that may use the random oracle, but definitely use other cryptography. This other cryptography will either push you to be quantum insecure or will push you somewhere where you're potentially quantum secure, but the paradigms and state of the art hasn't really kind of converged yet. Most notably, for example, in lattice-based constructions. But for things based on PCPs and IOPs, this is basically it, this book. Okay, there's a question about a little familiar with elliptic curves. And is it true that core cryptographic backend for SNARKs using elliptic curves can be swapped out for hash-based cryptography? To first order, yes. Now, of course, there are trade-offs, right? SNARKs based on elliptic curves give you today among the shortest argument sizes. We're talking about, sub kilobyte or just small number of kilobytes as argument size. This is something that is outside the state of the art for hash-based SNARKs today. The gap has been thinning, getting narrower and narrower. So, now we're like comfortably within below 100 kilobytes for hash-based SNARKs. And, my, personal opinion is that in a few years, it will be sub 50, if not sub 30 kilobytes. I'm not sure it will actually reach sub 1 kilobyte. Maybe that one, no. So today, we currently have multiple constructions that kind of trade against each other. So SNARKs based on elliptic curves will give you things like very, very short argument sizes. In return, what you will pay for are trusted setups with private coin setups. And you will have constructions that are currently secure, but will be insecure against quantum computers. Whereas with hash-based SNARKs, you're kind of future-proof, okay? But today, people kind of use a bit of both, depending upon what your application demands. All right, so more questions about this picture here. So again, okay, what is complexity math concept needed for this course? What are mathematics needed to? Okay, the complexity, there is basically no complexity needed. All you really need to know is to know what is a language. Because when you define a proof system, let's maybe go to the definition of a proof system. For example, a non-interactive argument, right? Here's the definition of completeness, for example. You need to be able to say, all right, so I need to be somewhat comfortable with the notion of a relation, right? You have an instance, you have a witness, and that's it, really. Like from the perspective of this book, we just have some abstract relation and we work with it. But we don't need to talk about, I don't know, complexity classes like NP or P space, next. They just don't appear in this book. It doesn't matter. Like these things matter a lot when you construct a probabilistic proof, but they just don't matter at all when you're just compiling a probabilistic proof for some relation into a SNARG for that very same relation. So we're kind of modding out by kind of any complexity theoretic notion. The mathematics is all in one, right? So we're talking about, okay, with sets, lists of things, strings, measuring the length of strings, asymptotic notation. This is the only complexity we need, just what is a language, what is a relation. Algorithms, okay, well, we have machines, right? You have black box use of algorithms, so we define some notation for that. Basic probability, like some simple statements about kind of conditional probability, inclusion, exclusion, union bound. This is like stuff that you would learn like in a second year undergrad or first year undergrad, okay? Statistical distance is all very simple math. I promise there is no deep math anywhere, okay? All right, more questions. Okay, so I will spend just maybe 3-4 minutes describing what to expect in the next few episodes, and I'll just stick around for maybe a longer tail of questions, but then I have nothing else to add kind of beyond that, okay? So in terms of the next few episodes, okay, it will not be me, but my kind of valiant and very kind PhD students who will take turns on presenting different pieces of the book, okay? But roughly speaking, it will be based on a selection of topics from parts in a way that follows this dependency graph. Most naturally, the next episode will be centered around part 1, introducing the object themselves. What are SNARGs? What is completeness? What is soundness? Notation? Some simple exercises about it. Just that. Then there's going to be one a lesson on part 2, which is Fiat-Shamir for Sigma protocols, and one lesson on part 3, Fiat-Shamir for interactive proofs. There's going to be one lesson on commitment schemes, okay? and one lesson on Killian, and possibly Mikali. I don't know if it's the same lesson or not, but either one or two. So right now we're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. So it's basically roughly there's going to be one lesson per part following this pattern. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Maybe 5 is 2 lessons, and then 6. All right. So 6 or 7 lessons. And obviously, it's not going to cover all the material in any given part. It's going to be a selection of what is the most interesting material, take away from that part. Currently, we don't necessarily have plans to cover anything from part 7, but we may consider a session on setting security parameters. Okay, that's probably one of the, if there is enough interest on that, then we'll have it. Okay. But that's basically the map. Intuitively, we'll just be following the order of the parts as stated. 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And potentially 5 is going to be two lessons. So that is what to expect next. With that, I don't really have anything else to add. Today was just really introductory. If some things didn't make sense, hopefully they will be unpacked and explained in the following episodes. And again, in terms of background, you don't need to know what is a process proof. It will be explained. You don't need to know what is a SNARG. It will be explained. And in terms of math, it's all kind of, pretty basic. Okay, that's one of the advantages of this kind of little section of the SNARGscape. So I'm just going to stick around for more questions, either about the book or other things, and I can just maybe take it from there.
Thank you very much. Maybe before we have people asking questions, I don't know if we'll have any, but yeah, I wanted to say thank you very much, Alessandro, for this thorough review. Kind of looking forward also the next one with your student. Do you know already who's gonna be taking care of this first session next week? It's gonna be Tuesday.
I genuinely don't remember, so
no worries. I think I saw Christian here earlier. I don't know if that's going to be him, but yeah, typically that's something we'll figure out as well on the Discord. I'm kind of anticipating the questions here.